Hello, welcome to another episode of Test, Optimize, and Scale. I've been looking forward to today's episode. I think you will be very happy towards the end of it in hearing all the intricacies that Troy Helming, co-founder, CEO of EarthGrid, is bringing to the world, bringing to the equity crowdfunding space. Troy has over 6 exits, one of them a deca unicorn, another in path to becoming a unicorn, has a top campaign on net capital, and we're going to learn everything it is today that has positioned EarthGrid and Troy into this place. So Troy, thanks for taking the time to hop on the podcast here.
Jason, it's my pleasure. Good to be here.
And want to be able to familiarize the audiences with your story. Where did it all begin for you? How did you enter the professional world and be able to start these organizations that have exited, have very much hit the goals, the dream for many entrepreneurs? Where did it all begin?
Okay, and yes, I've had 6 exits, but I think I should start by saying I have had a failure as well. So 7 companies total, 1 failure, 6 exits, and I'm on company number 8 right now. But it started really with my dad being an entrepreneur, most of my aunts and uncles being entrepreneurs. So I kind of grew up in that mindset and saw the challenges that my mom had, with the struggles of being married to an entrepreneur, because there were some feast years, but a lot of famine years as well. I don't think I really had a choice because, like I said, I had family members, but involved in this. But I got my first job out of college at a big corporation, AT&T. And wanted to learn what I was good at, what I was not good at. I wanted to be an engineer in college. My dad said, go get a business degree. You can hire engineers. So I did, and I did. But I really should start a little earlier because I'm in the clean energy space. And how I got interested in that is in 1980, my dad built his dream home in the Midwest. And it was one of my chores growing up to maintain our solar hot water heating system that was installed on the home. So it heated our pool, our water in the house, our hot tub, even heated the air in the wintertime when we shut the pool down. But there were no jobs when I got out of business school in clean energy, so I went to work in telecommunications. And to answer your question, how I got involved in entrepreneurship is I did really well at AT&T, broke a bunch of records selling hardware for them, telecommunications equipment, key systems, PBX systems, and fiber and so forth, or bandwidth, I should say, at that time. And they rewarded me by shrinking my territory in half. And then the next year they did it again. And so I'm like, wait a minute, I'm breaking records and you're making me do more work with less potential customers. So I was like, forget about this. I'm going to leave and compete with these guys. So that's what I did. My first company was in direct competition with AT&T, and I started that in 1992.
So you're growing up, you have an interest in clean energy, you're managing the solar heating system, but at the pool of family's house, but at the same time, not really a place for that. You've gotten good advice, getting your business degree, determining you could hire entrepreneurs and have more of an impact, have more growth that way. Working at AT&T, saw the success. Meanwhile, didn't like the corporate infrastructure. They're making your territory smaller as you're winning these awards. And at 1992, you're now creating this company to compete. It must be so much different 7 companies in now. And with the actual, I may say, accolades of exits, unicorn, let alone deca unicorn type companies. Do you recall some of the emotions back then, some of the fears, some of the concerns, and how you channeled that into, driving the company forward? Was it difficult to compete, in the segment of the market against AT&T, or being the smaller player? Did you find advantages? What were those early experiences like?
It was difficult. I made tons of mistakes. I don't remember all of it. I was young. I was single, so I didn't have a family to take care of. But nevertheless, there were many times where I was eating ramen noodles, hot dogs, and peanut butter sandwiches because I literally didn't have the income. And I had made good money at AT&T, but I wasn't smart with it. I was traveling and going on dates with girlfriends or whatever, and so that'd be one of my early lessons: is make sure you build up a nest egg. If other folks are thinking about starting their own company or starting their next one, make sure that the financial pressure on your personal living situation is such that you're not going to make poor decisions strategically for your company just to take some money out to pay the bills. So wait a little longer, build up a nest egg. That I distinctly remember. Gosh, did I do the right thing? Maybe I should go get a job. The grass is always greener, on the other side. So that for sure is a lesson. But eventually, I started to close, more consistent deals, and the cash flow was consistent. And then I added some product lines. We added Nextel wireless phones to the business, and eventually built it up to where we had 35 employees, and we were the largest distributor of Lucent Technologies and Avaya equipment in Missouri and Kansas, as well as Nextel in Missouri and Kansas. But yeah, the nest egg, but then also being focused on the right things. That's another big lesson. It took me a while to get the self-discipline, because I was working from home, right? I had my own little business, couldn't afford an office, and I would get distracted with this, that, or the other thing. And so I had to teach myself the self-discipline to actually put the time into the business, and not just busy work, doing administrative things, but actually picking up the phone, overcoming my fear, because I was introverted, most of my life, overcoming the fear of making calls. So I guess those are the thoughts that are coming to mind.
Putting yourself out there, especially if something you care about, can be daunting. I'm feel numb to it at times, but with the right partnership conversations, those feelings come right back up. I imagine you experience some of the same things. And getting up to 35 employees, top seller, Missouri, Kansas. How did you know it was time to move on? Was it merger and acquisition conversations? I know you said you had an exit. How did you be able to see the success that you had and then make a jump? 7 companies, 6 exits to the next stage, the next chapter of your career.
Yeah, so really it was the margins. The industry, the telecommunications industry, was paying really good margins, especially on wireless acquisitions there for a while. And when that started to drop every year, it got to a point where it was harder and harder, to make a profit, and it wasn't as enjoyable. It was a bit of a grind. But what really did it for me is I believe it was in 1996 that I read maybe it was 95. I read an article that said 3 states, Kansas, Texas, and North Dakota, had enough wind energy potential to power the whole country. I was like, wow, that's really cool. Maybe somebody should do something about that. So I was researching it, and there was a wind farm that was being built in Kansas by Florida Power and Light, of all companies. And I was like, that's super cool. So I went, drove down to Montezuma, Kansas, in the middle of nowhere, and checked it out. And that's why my hair still sticks up today, hanging around the windy parts of Kansas. Yeah, so I started a wind company. I sold my first company and didn't make a lot. It was, I think, barely into 6 figures, but low 6 figures, if I remember correctly. Sold it to another telecom company that was in the hardware business, and started a wind company, and then hired a few people that were way smarter than me on wind, and started going out and getting site leases from landowners that wanted to put a wind farm on their property, and talking to utilities about buying the power, and raising money from angel investors. And that was the first time I'd actually had to raise money for a company.
So moving on from Teleteam over to TradeWind Energy, you see the opportunity, you get into the space, leaving some of the obstacles, some of the downsides, margins of the industry that you had talked about in telecommunications, And now you are working more in the world of cleaner energy, and really starting to build out the infrastructure, build partnerships. How were you able to grow that business to notable market share?
Yeah, so I wanted to try to figure out a way to own the projects and create kind of that mailbox money, that residual income that we all strive for. I was like, wow, if we could build some wind turbines and own them, as long as the wind is blowing, they're going to create electricity, and we can get paid for it, right? And so that was my goal, but it turned out that was a lot harder than I thought, and turned out that really the projects are quite large. 100, 200, $400 million wind farms. There were some community wind projects around the country and around the world, but they were really hard to do. So anyway, raised a fair amount of money, and we partnered up with another company, Podoma Wind Power, out of San Diego, that had a track record developing and building wind farms, and raised, I think, around $5 million, mostly from angels and family offices back then. And we started getting contracts with utilities to buy the power. We were submitting interconnection requests to connect to the grid, and getting permits. And of course, we had hundreds and hundreds of land leases with farmers and ranchers to do this. So got it to a point where it was a pretty good business. And then in 2004, I realized, it's going to be really hard for us to own these projects. We can't raise enough to build a $200 million wind farm and still own it. We have to bring in institutional investors. And at that time, solar was starting to look pretty attractive economically. And so I had hired a team, around me that were really good. And Rob Freeman, I was like, you know what, Rob could run this company. I think I'd rather focus on solar. And so that's basically what I did. I sold most of my shares in 2004, promoted Rob to CEO, and then I started focusing on crystal energy as well as a solar business, kind of two at the same time. And then I'll just finish the story that TradeWind Energy became the largest developer of wind farms in the United States in 2017, and I think they were number 2 in 2018. So my second company, and I made good money when I sold my shares, really good money, but I should have held on to more of the shares because it did really well. It's now a $35 billion portfolio of Enel Clean Power, the big Italian company.
So really, you're finding the right management, moving on to the next ventures, and being able to focus energy there while continuing to grow those organizations, seeing exits take place, seeing them get absorbed or just take on more of the market, and being able to focus on where the wind takes you, where the emerging technologies are, where your real passion is at the time.
Yeah, that's right. Because again, I wanted to own projects rather than just develop it and sell it to an institutional and have a one-time payment, and then you're waiting for the next wind project to be ready to sell. You're not creating any real long-term, revenue stream, real value in the company. And so, I mean, not to say it wasn't valuable. They made a lot of money, right? But the ultimate owner was the big Italian utility, Enel Green Power, and it's now a big part of their portfolio, as I mentioned. But yeah, and so I wanted to focus on solar, so I started Crystal Energy. Another area that I felt was important is there were a lot of people that were kind of pretty against green energy, right? And I was like the wind guy and speaking at conferences and going to both solar and wind conferences, and a lot of people were poo-pooing it. Oh, it's alternative energy, it's never going to amount to much. I even got death threats. My picture was also up on a dartboard at 2 of the coal utilities in the Midwest. They didn't like me very much. And so Crystal Energy was designed to basically help consumers and small businesses become more energy efficient and put some small renewable energy products like little residential wind turbines and residential solar and things like that. And that's my failure. That company didn't make it, mainly because the margins were too thin, and we were, I think, ahead of our time too much. There was some market adoption, but it wasn't strong enough. and it didn't grow fast enough that eventually we just had to fold that company.
And they say you learn more from your losses than your wins. Is that what you were experiencing there?
For sure. Yeah, and one example is we tried to do too much. We had a home energy review, or we were training people to go in and do a whole assessment on someone's home and switch out their incandescent bulbs to CFLs or LEDs. They actually weren't available then, really, or they were, but they were too expensive. And new insulation and window, just a whole bunch of stuff we were trying to do, and it was too much. And a lot of homeowners were unwilling to pay very much for that. They were like, well, you can come in and do the assessment. I may or may not buy some stuff. And sometimes they did, sometimes they didn't. And like I said, the margins were thin. We were doing that. Plus, we were trying to sell renewable energy certificates, otherwise known as green tags. And then we were selling products for vehicles to try to make them more fuel efficient, just a lot of things. And it got to where we were just spread way too thin. So my favorite saying these days is the wolf that chases two rabbits goes hungry. And we were chasing like 5 or 6 rabbits.
And to have that niche focus gets you a lot further, going at that one rabbit versus 2, let alone 5 or 6. I'm going to quote you on that saying. I like that one. And it is all about focus and being the best at getting that one rabbit versus even getting close to getting several others. Exactly. So it sounds like you had some pushback. I've experienced that with some energy clients as well in the past in terms of publisher coverage. So I have a feeling towards it. There is some resistance I've found in the market. Dartboard, I can't even imagine death threats. But you were out there to work with small businesses on more efficient models, cleaner, regenerative energy. But that didn't work. Where did you move on from there? How did you start getting closer and closer to EarthGrid and where your day-to-day, where your focus lies now?
Yeah, sure. I'll basically skip over. I mean, I started Pristine Sun and a biodiesel plant as well, sold the biodiesel plant, and then moved to back to California, where my family's originally from. And my wife went to college in California as well. And the solar company is about to hit unicorn status. It raised $250 million of equity last year, and our family office still owns a big chunk of that company. I'm chairman of the board, but I don't run it. But at the wind company and at the solar company, over the years, I have encountered numerous projects where we had to walk away from the solar farm or the wind farm, abandon it completely after spending sometimes 2 or 3 years and sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars. And the reason we would have to walk away is eventually the studies came back from the grid operator, and they would tell us that it was too costly to make all the upgrades to the creaky old grid to connect the wind farm or the solar farm, or there just simply wasn't capacity on the lines, without a major reconductoring of all the lines, which is, hundreds of millions of dollars. So that was a pain point that I experienced for basically decades, right? And so fast forward to EarthGrid, and I should also mention I wrote this book, The Clean Power Revolution. Don't buy it because it'll put you right to sleep. But 20 years ago, I wrote it, and I talked about how we need 270 new transmission lines in North America to unlock all this cheap solar and wind power, and it's just not happening. It takes 20, 25 years to get new transmission lines approved and finally built, and most of them die along the way. So EarthGrid, in 2016, my solar company had yet again a solar farm we had to downsize by 75% because the grid couldn't handle it. So our utility customer was willing to buy this much. The grid can only handle a quarter of it, so we had to downsize the whole project. So major disappointment, right? And it happens all the time in the industry. So we're drowning our tears over beers at a happy hour, San Francisco. And one of our solar GIS engineers, Dominic, was bragging to his girlfriend about how when he was a former Navy SEAL, his SEAL team used to enter enemy ships. They would practice entering enemy ships underwater by cutting through the side of the ship with a plasma cutting torch. And the water would rush in, plate falls in, they pow, 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 and so we're like, dude, you're badass. Anyway, he's like, yeah, that thing was 20,000 degrees. That could take your arm off. And so anyway, middle of the night that night, I wake up, 20,000 degrees. That's got to be hot enough to go through rock, right? Online researching, yeah, it's hot enough to vaporize it. Well, surely somebody's doing this. Well, no one was doing it, although I found some papers from the 1970s from Los Alamos National Laboratory where they were testing it, and it kind of worked, but there were some significant technical challenges. Anyway, I just couldn't stop thinking about the idea. So finally, I hired an engineering firm to do a feasibility study. And a few months later, they came back and said, yes, this will work. Number two, nobody is doing this. Number three, you can go at speeds of up to 1 kilometer per day through the Earth's crust. And number four, here's your operating cost. And I ran the math on that, because I've built hundreds of trenches and tunnels over my career, for solar and wind farms and substations and you name it, power lines, fiber. And it's all civil construction is always expensive and risky. It almost never comes in on budget or on time. And I was like, these cost figures, they can't be right. It's way too cheap. So I was like, we got a business here. So I didn't tell my wife, but I was like, I'm going to build a prototype. I take some family money and from the profitable solar company and build a prototype. And so I did that in 2017. It punched a hole through a boulder of granite, and I was like, yes, it worked. Me and a couple of engineers put it all together. So that was the start of the company.
Amazing. And I have to point out these 7 companies, they very much seem like strategic progressions. So, what you're running into with wind, with solar, tears over beers. I like that saying here as well too. Haven't said that one. You get this idea from taking from other spaces, from other industries, that you can go through rock. 20,000 degrees can melt through, and you're able to actually run the costs, and it seems very efficient. You're running your tests, it's working. Now you're able to address this obstacle of these heavy costs, heavy approvals that are required to get all of these different transmission lines connected. I mean, it sounded like 25 years just to get approvals, let alone the costs, the infrastructure needed, just these dead ends you now have an access to through what you're mapping out in the planning of EarthGrid.
Yeah, that's right. We've made a huge amount of traction. We had to do a fair amount of testing there in 2017, 18, and so on. Make sure it works in different types of rock and geologies. I'll give you one fun example. We actually had an accident that taught us something, and that was when we were punching through a boulder of limestone. And limestone is generally a softer rock. It's much softer than granite, but some limestone can be really hard. It can be harder than concrete. And anyway, we were pushing our machine, our prototype, pretty hard. And it was about at the end of its useful life of the front electrode. They have to be replaced every several hundred hours. And we were like, let's just push it. Anyway, the electrode failed. Part of it melted away, and the O-ring also failed. So water started squirting out inside, and we saw all this smoke and steam or whatever, steam actually. And and so Craig ran over and shut it off, but it was I don't know, 20, 30 seconds or something later. And we realized that it had created this big cavern inside the boulder, like the size of 2 or 3 bowling balls. And it was way bigger than the rest of the tunnel that we were punching through in there. And we realized that adding water in limestone is actually a catalyst. It actually accelerates and makes the boring happen faster. And we wouldn't have known that necessarily had that accident not occurred.
They say to be an expert at something, you need to have had made every mistake at it you could. So having accident then lead to that finding, and then a smoother, faster process moving forward with limestone.
That's right. And then to the theme of the podcast, test, optimize, and scale. So optimizing, we have had to come up with the recipe for each kind of rock. There are 7 variables that we can modify as we're going through to optimize our rate of progress, our rate of penetration, in the case of boring, or rate of progress in the case of trenching, because we can do both. We can get rid of rock much faster and much cheaper than mechanical methods. We don't have to use jackhammers or dynamite or drill bits or cutting heads or any of that kind of stuff. But yeah, to optimize, there's a sweet spot in the plasma plume where it's like 27,000 degrees, and then the rest of it's like 6,000 or 7,000 degrees. And that's hot enough to vaporize everything, but vaporizing takes longer and it takes more energy. In fact, it takes 7 times more energy than what's called spallation, which means the rock breaks up into little bits, or it melts if there's silica in it. And so we try to optimize for spallation before it has a chance to melt or vaporize. And that's taken a lot of time, a lot of R&D, and a number of years.
Now, are there other groups doing this? I've heard of the Boring Company, Elon Musk, of course. Are there other groups looking at the same applications for tunneling and boring technology that you are? Are they experiencing these same findings? Are they piggybacking off of yours? What does your specific vertical, what does your competitor landscape look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. First of all, I'm so grateful to Elon for raising awareness of tunneling, right? I mean, he's brought that kind of to the forefront of a lot of people's consciousness, because our infrastructure is failing in the US. We recently got a C- grade from the American Society of Civil Engineers. It's usually a D or a D-. So we need to upgrade our infrastructure, our water pipelines, gas lines, transmission, roads, bridges, tunnels, all of it. But to answer your question, yes, there are other companies out there trying to come up with more clever ways rather than mechanical means to use energetic means to do drilling and boring. So you don't have to change out your drill bits or your cutter heads 5, 10, 15 times a day. So one example is Foro Energy. They're using lasers. They're focused mostly on vertical rather than horizontal. Another one is the Boring Company, Elon's company. They're still using tunnel boring machines, the slowly rotating disc. They've made some really clever enhancements to their tech, and so it's faster and cheaper than it used to be. But I would characterize them as incremental, or maybe a little better than incremental improvements. They still can't really get through hard rock, and they're still relatively slow. So they go great through soil and soft rock, but medium and hard rock, you have to have a different type of machine. Elon's and his team have been quoted as saying that their aspiration is to someday be as fast as a snail. The EarthGrid tech is already 80 times faster than a snail. Right. Other companies out there, GA Drilling and Petra. I was an early employee at Petra. They're no longer using plasma. They're using another process. It's also clever, and I wish them the best, but it uses a natural gas or propane kind of steam process. It is faster and cheaper than conventional tech. We believe that they won't ever be able to catch us with respect to speed or cost. And then GA Drilling is a company based in Slovakia, and we're in touch with them. They're probably a year or two, maybe 3 years behind us. GA stands for geothermal anywhere. So they're focused on using plasma to go vertical, whereas we're using plasma to go horizontal. So there may be, as I mentioned, some collaboration there. And there's a few other companies out there, using projectiles that they launch with rocket engines or whatever to weaken the rock, and then they scoop it out. There's a lot of R&D being done, and I'm glad about that. There's room for 100 companies in this space to make improvements. But I don't think anyone can catch us on our speed and our cost. We have 64 patent claims published, with another 40 some pending, and over 1,000 trade secrets that we will never patent.
Incredible. And just hearing about these comparisons. Now, these other groups, and maybe, speaking to this next topic, are they also focused on the renewable energy obstacles having to do with transmission lines? Are they looking towards, I know some of them are more around transportation or other segments. Are they also looking towards this obstacle and access for transmission lines?
Not to my knowledge. Possibly some of them are thinking about it or working on it. I'm not sure. I mean, myself and my co-founder Scott Lane have been in clean energy and in the power business for most of our careers. So we have a very large Rolodex and a track record and credibility, and I think we can talk to those folks. And as a result, we have a lot of customers we're talking to, and a number of signed customer agreements already. So I think we're probably far and away the leader in that segment. Doesn't mean that's all we're doing. We're also doing fiber, and we have customers that want water, which includes water lines, wastewater lines, recycled water lines, and stormwater. Yeah, Elon's, I think, mostly focused on transportation, and the other companies are focused on their niche.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It does sound very collaborative, and the rising tide lift all ships, as you mentioned. The awareness for the sector definitely has people looking down, if you will, and thinking about possibilities for getting places quicker, transmission lines, renewable energy, things that can be done that conserve space, make things more efficient as a whole by tunneling and boring. But it sounds like, even like you said, hey, they have a different approach, wish them well, that it's more of a collaborative, let's find the best solutions for the world versus some other industries that are fighting for individual pieces of market share.
Yeah, that's right. And so now that we've de-risked a lot of our subsystems and optimized our recipes for the different types of rock and soil and so forth, now it's all, for us anyway, it's all about scale. We have our MVP, our minimum viable product, was built in late January. We have made a huge amount of improvement since then. A number of additional mistakes, things we learned from. We've hardened the machine significantly, but we have a plasma trenching machine that can dig ditches, basically, in hard rock. And so a lot of people think, well, don't you just do that in dirt? And yes, you do. And that's not our market. We can't really compete, digging a ditch in dirt. But in the hills or mountains, anywhere in the world, if you want to put in a new fiber line for working from home to get internet or broadband, or you need power or you need water, those lines generally need to be about 1 meter, 3 feet below the surface. And if the soil layer is thin and it's rock, the only way to get down to that depth is with jackhammers or dynamite. Dynamite's not allowed in most areas, so you have to use jackhammers, and it's slow and it's expensive. And so that's the first machine we have, and we've been digging trenches at our first customer job site and actually generating significant revenue for the first time.
Very nice. Very nice. I know many entrepreneurs never get to that point, even with amazing technologies, seeing the revenue come in. And I know investors have been responding to it on your net capital page. Have one of the top raises on net capital, and we follow metrics on Kingscrowd of all of our CF. You're right there as well too. So I know the numbers have been resonating. What have been the key drivers for this marketing push, which is around investment crowdfunding? But why did you choose to do a Reg CF, regulation crowdfunding campaign? And what has really been making it work? You mentioned your Rolodex, your partnerships, the content that you're creating, I know plays a large piece. And for other founders listening in as well too, what made you go down this road, and why has it been working?
Yeah, great question. I'm thinking of a few things. So I'll start by saying that before we started the crowdfunding campaign, we had already raised a fair amount of capital. My family office had put some money in. We bootstrapped. We had de-risked a lot of the company, the tech, and the business model. Like, for instance, we have become approved as a utility in a number of states. Before we launched the crowdfunding campaign, I think we were already approved by over 20 states as a utility. So EarthGrid is a regulated utility and now in 31 states. That means that gives us access to, preferred access to the rights of way to put in our tunnels and our trenches. And then de-risking the tech. We've raised a total of about $30 million since 2016. And by the time we launched crowdfunding on net capital, I think we had raised around 18 or 19, maybe 20 million. So those things help, right? Because before we go out to the crowd, we've already shown that we can raise money. We've already shown that we can achieve traction, filed patents and customer contracts signed, and a lot of traction. It's a pretty long list when we look at our frequently asked questions document that we provide to investors of traction. And then we thought, all right, well, we're solving an acute problem. Power lines are causing fires in California, Colorado, Oregon, Australia. They're literally killing people and destroying property, right? And putting this stuff underground would solve that problem. Plus, as we've already discussed, the biggest impediment to growth of renewables. We need more transmission to unlock wind and solar. But we have spent money on advertising. We try to get our message out there. Our return on ad spend ranges anywhere from like 3x to higher. We've had some crazy high numbers, but I think it averages about 3 to 7. Meaning, for every dollar we spend on advertising, we get $3 to $7 of investment on the net capital platform. And so that's calculus that works, right? We're going to keep doing that.
Very nice. Very nice. And yeah, definitely like pointing out the traction that you have, the track record. I know a lot of the retail and accredited investors that we survey really point towards the team. So spending time on our discussion, going into greater detail there, I think is a very important piece. And of course, the market. I know you can't make forward-looking statements on these type of campaigns per SEC guidelines, but just I think audiences have pointed out, looking at the industry, where the industry may be 2025, 2030, later points, and how you guys are having these breakthroughs that other groups in the space aren't even touching. It really stands out. I imagine the awareness around boring and tunneling help as well. Audience sees a headline on one of their favorite publishers. They then see you guys on EarthGrid, and not to mention not just the momentum in terms of revenue and application, but that you guys have raised that 18 million, that 30 to date, that you guys have. Utility approval in 31 states, the patents, the pending patents, everything continues to stack and stack and stack. It definitely paints the picture of what we say successful equity crowdfunding campaigns entail, which is momentum that audiences do not want to miss out on.
Yeah, I think that's right. And just the upside. I mean, yes, I have a track record. I've built some big companies, one Deca unicorn, one soon to be unicorn. And we've been told by some VCs and some institutional investors that EarthGrid could be a centa unicorn or even $1 trillion company. And it's just the size of the market. Just big tunnels for transportation and water is a $2 trillion market, just that alone. And then you add in the electric power grid and smaller tunnels for fiber and smaller water pipelines and other pipelines. That's another $1 trillion. It's a huge market, and that's just North America. Globally, it's whatever. It's hard to comprehend the size of the opportunity here. So I think those things help, and so folks realize, yeah, they're solving some short-term problems, but this could be a really big company.
Absolutely, and want to be able to share with listeners a bit about what you've used to create EarthGrid, what you've used to create your 7 companies to date and see success. And per the title of the show, look at marketing as a series of tests. You've obviously been testing different ads, different audiences, different partnerships for the raise. I can't imagine all of the different whiteboarding sessions determined that took place to determine what you guys are doing in terms of product for EarthGrid. What recommendations do you have for listeners in terms of what they could test towards their own model, their own marketing, their own raise, based on your experiences?
Yeah, so again, focus on traction. We've already covered that, but it can't be overemphasized. It's so important because you want to be able to show that there's a market fit for your product or your service, and people want to see that you've got the stomach and the ability to be scrappy enough to actually go get things done. I mentioned scrappy, so it made me think of one real quick story. I've always been scrappy. EarthGrid is scrappy, literally. When we were building our MVP, we were struggling to find some really thick power cables to power our torch in between the power supply and the torch. And so we actually reached out to a bunch of folks, and we literally found scrap wire from a company we knew that had scrap laying around a warehouse that it was too short. They didn't really know what to do with it. So we're like, all right, we'll buy that scrap off your hands. So we literally are scrappy. Those are the kinds of characteristics, that investors want to see, that there's going to be downtimes in any company, and they want to see that the founding team or the C-suite or both have the stomach to get through it, the creativity to be scrappy to get through it, and that you can do a lot with a little. It's so important, have that self-discipline, work really, really hard to try to create traction with minimal amounts of funds. When money is easy to raise, a lot of inefficiencies are created because people are like, I'm going to delegate this, I'm going to hire for that, blah, blah, blah. So hire slow, fire fast, do as much as you can yourselves and achieve, significant traction, and then, mark it down, and shout from the rooftops about your traction, and tell people where you're going and how you're going to stay focused on chasing that one rabbit.
I love the scrappy story. I couldn't echo that large enough. And it's the whole, one man's trash is another man's treasure. But finding the outside of the box solution, better access, better costs. I've seen so many founders, working with hundreds of companies, go through that same storyline that you mentioned there. Of things are going well, let's hire this, let's do that. We need to grow, growth. And then there's all these inefficiencies, and they have to work backwards because they're running into quality control, to say the least, types of problems occurring. So hire slow, fire fast. Definitely think that's great to echo, and everyone's heard it, but you can't hear it enough. What about optimization? You talked a bit about how you optimized earlier. So much of what we read online is about success. You were gracious enough open enough to be able to talk about your one failure of your 6 exits. And I do believe that that's where the real, growth occurs. What can founders do when it's not working? Again, they launch a campaign, it's not moving, the product isn't producing the numbers that they wanted. You had mentioned how you recalculated the margins and were able to reconfigure. What are the best steps? What are the best approaches towards optimization?
Yeah, one of my favorite books is Super Founders. For those who haven't read it, I recommend it. Most companies have to pivot at least once or twice in their history to, find the right formula for their success on the product and marketing side or other areas, engineering, whatever it might be. So I'll give one more example of a mistake that I made, because I think it's, as you said, we learn a lot more from hard times. At my solar company, we were growing really, really fast, growing well, and getting lots of contracts and building lots of projects. But then we grew too fast, and I take full responsibility for that. I was like, you know what, we can go capture a big chunk of the market. So we grew from about 20 employees to 80 in 1 year, and to support that growth, not only of the payroll, but more importantly for us anyway, was the cost of developing projects, going out and getting permits and doing engineering studies and the grid connection studies and all of that. It's very capital intensive. And so we got a loan. We had raised $10 million of private equity in 2011, spent it wisely, had $100 million of assets on the balance sheet in 2.5 years, and bought out our private equity investor. And so we didn't raise more equity. We should have, but we were like, we can do this on our own, me and my team. So we took out a loan, and then we took out more on that line, and more and more and more. And we got up from, we started at, I think it was 7 or 8 million. We got up to 26 million in debt, and it would have been fine. But then there were some economic conditions that changed that were outside of our control. We couldn't have forecast that oil prices in 2015 were going to crash, right? And we were about to receive a big investment from First Solar, a publicly traded, wonderful solar company. But they fired their whole M&A team when their stock price crashed by 45% in 3 weeks because oil prices crashed. So everybody was unloading all their stock in all forms of energy, not just oil. It affected solar and wind as well. Anyway, and so all of a sudden, our big equity infusion that our lender wanted us to get fell away, and they gave us 90 days to pay off their loan or get equity. And so we had to rush into a bad joint venture deal because that was the best we could find in that short period of time. And then that ultimately caused some serious challenges. The joint venture was with, and this is public, it was with a Chinese solar manufacturer by the name of Renesola. Again, this is all public, but there was a dispute and we settled, but that was 18 months later. So we went from 80 employees down to a handful during that time until the litigation was settled. It was very painful, but Pristine Sun has been profitable every year but one that year since then, or since 2013, I guess, after we really hit our stride. But that's another mistake is we grew too fast and we took on too much debt. So founders out there right now are probably going to be tempted to take on debt because it's hard to raise VC money, right? A lot of VCs are struggling to raise money, so they're in turns, not doling out as much to their portfolio companies, not doing as many deals. Just be careful, fellow founders. I've been there. A lender has a lot of power. They have, covenants in the loans where they can come in and basically take over the company and impose a lot of pain on you and on the company. So be cautious about how much debt you take on.
The one sounds like that was the down year, 80 down to a handful. And then, as you mentioned, things have been going well, growing. I'm sure there's ups and downs ever since, but you pushed through it. Many founders, many groups, I think it's human nature to not and to be able to move over to something else. But you're able to do so. And I think that's great advice there as well, too, of be careful on the payment terms that you take on, the billing terms. What seems like it could be a quick fix could be giving away the keys to the office. So being able to see all sides of it and the ability to push through is what I really want to emphasize there. What about scale? I think, of guests that we have on, having the 6 exits, one deck of unicorn, really standouts, and what I believe a founder would ask you about if they were going through their model with you in person, maybe at a conference. How do I grow my company? How do I scale? We've tested, we've optimized things to a decent point. We're at this level. How do we take it to here? And definitely have the experiences to be able to have weight behind this answer.
Yeah, reducing friction for my industry, it's probably different, because we're in the clean energy industry. So scale for us, isn't necessarily people, although going from 20 to 80, and we have 22 at EarthGrid now, and I had 35 at the telecom, but I haven't had hundreds and hundreds of employees. But at Pristine Sun, we got to the point where we were arranging billions of dollars of projects and project finance capital. So scale to me is that, right? But and for others, it might be scaling up manufacturing, or it might be scaling up with people to manage, a SaaS or software model of some kind. So it means different things to different people, but where I found the most benefits in scaling companies was creating really good systems. And I'll give one example. At both EarthGrid and my previous company, Pristine Sun, we created project management software platforms. And there's a lot of great software out there now that people can utilize that is off the shelf. We had to, customize some of it 10, 15 years ago for our purposes. But creating really good best practices so that everyone is singing from the same sheet of music, right? On doing the processes to develop, in our case, solar farms or wind farms, and then also on hiring. So we found that when we were hiring too fast, we got some bad apples, and a bad apple spoils the bunch, as the saying goes, and it really is true. And so we had to implement some scaling on our HR side so that we could make sure that people were being asked the right questions. So we had an automated test that people would take, and that made sure that folks lined up with the culture of the company, so that there wouldn't be that clash. So those are, I guess, the two things that come to mind is kind of the ERP processes and the HR
Yeah.
processes. So
All about the processes. You throw too much fuel on the fire and those are not in place, you're going to have an issue. But ERP processes, HR, having that all built to scale and continuing to refine as you go up, I think is key. And Troy, want to, as we begin to wind down the conversation here, thank you, of course, for coming on and kind of set things up for final thoughts, final notes for listeners. I'm going to be pointing out some of the things you talked about for scale to the team and looking to apply, to Earth Grid. I know, forward-looking statements are, sensitive in the industry, but just hearing the way you approach business, excited to see about where Earth Grid's going. If anyone wants to get in contact with you, what's the best way to do so? And what are wrap-up notes you'd like to leave listeners with today?
Yeah, okay. I can be reached on social media at Solar Ninja Troy. I'm also an athlete. I was asked to compete on American Ninja Warrior, the NBC hit show, 4 times, and have been an elite athlete for a number of years now because of that. So Solar Ninja Troy on all my social media, and then you can go to earthgrid.io is our website. My email is troy@earthgrid.io. And then, of course, our crowdfunding campaign is available on netcapital.com, and you'll see EarthGrid on there. So encourage folks to do that. In terms of, I guess just kind of parting things, I want to say that work-life balance for me has been super important. I mentioned self-discipline early. That's a trait that in studying the lives of successful men and women throughout, history, all the work that I've done in studying that and trying to learn, is that's really the one trait everybody has in common and who is successful is self-discipline. So we already touched on that, but work-life balance for me, being an athlete gives me the energy to, continue to work hard and overcome, when we had the litigation and went from 80 employees to a handful and then slowly built it back up and avoided bankruptcy. A lot of companies went bankrupt during that time. We call it the solar coaster because it's been a challenging time. But we avoided that. And it takes a lot of not just, mental energy, but physical energy and emotional energy. So being in good shape really, really helps. I had a dad bod there for a while. And so that's important. I don't work on Sundays. I only work half a day on Saturday. I want to be a good husband and a good father. I'll be 20 years married next year. So I think it's important to have that work-life balance and sleep. I think it's so ridiculous when people brag about, I can get by on 5 hours of sleep. It's just stupid. We need enough sleep, and everyone has their own amount that you need. Might be 7 hours, might be 9, whatever, but we need enough sleep. That's how you detox the brain, cleans out the brain. Get enough sleep. Please get exercise and have work-life balance. You'll sleep more deeply if you're exercising, and you'll have more energy. You'll be more positive and more productive, and you're just going to be happier overall.
7 companies, Deca Unicorn, one in Path to be Unicorn, campaign live on Net Capital, American Ninja Warrior, athlete, and being able to balance that all out. I take some of those practices for nights and weekends for myself and try to recharge the batteries for coming back in. On Monday, sleep, I think it's not talked about enough, and how it allows you to perform throughout the day. So I am on the same page as you. I think many people listening in would love to be at the point you're at one day. So for you taking the time to share what's worked for you in this discussion is huge. Want to thank you for that and putting it into your schedule here today. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you next time. Take care.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, Jason. Thanks, everybody, for listening.